Test, test.
But I wanted to do my freshman.
How long has this initiative been going on? It's like a pretty recent thing. I mean, as far as like making.
There's time when you need help, when you need space, they should come together and do things. Because these meetups is so valuable for all of us. As we share knowledge and continues to grow not only professionally for yourself, but also get back to the community. So I'm excited to be part of this and at least offer a space for you guys to use. So I hope this is a great meeting for you guys, and if there's any other time you need it, let us know. But we do web development on a large scale, and if there's any experienced digital strategists, we are looking. This is Noah, my son. And that's Amelia, my daughter, my wife Sam, and the little one over there is little Monster. All right, you ready?
So yeah, again, when Stephen Rodriguez, who was organizing this for the DMV region, reached out, I had thought to myself, as a minority, as a brown woman in tech, I already have kind of like issues in dealing with the world. And then I was thinking there isn't anything that's specifically focused on the LGBTQIA community. And I want to be as much of an ally as possible, but like you, I'm learning. When I first entitled this, it was queer in tech, and I was informed that that is actually not appropriate for some people. So I would invite you to continue to help me figure out the best ways to articulate and make sure we can make this safe and inclusive and shared space for learning. A couple housekeeping. So when we go in and out, the doors here, the restrooms around the corner. Hashtag is DEIatGEW2019. And thank you to my support team. And what I'll actually do is, if I can invite each of the panelists to talk a little bit about who you are, what you offer, and why you're here, and we'll continue forward.
I'm Sian. I work at Newman, I'm a data scientist. I live diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is my life. And I'm really happy to be here.
Hi, I'm Lianna. I don't use any pronouns, so I just ask folks to use my first name. I also work at Hamilton. I'm a software engineer. Outside shoes, I also am the DC chapter head for Tech and the director of affinity groups for OCE, which stands for Out in Science, Technology, and Engineering and Mathematics.
Hi, I'm Tomás. I'm an account manager at Vanguard Communications. We're a boutique PR firm based here in DC. Our specialty is social marketing, which is basically using marketing techniques to create positive behavior change. We also do strategic communications planning. We do a lot of work with clients who are focused on diversity and equity, and so we've spent a lot of time researching that and understanding how we can do it better.
Hi everyone, I'm Shannon Turner, and I'm a software developer and the founder of Hear Me Code, which offer free beginner-friendly coding classes for over 3,500 women right here in DC.
I'm a product strategist and engagement manager with Skylight Digital, a small federal contractor working in the state of Connecticut.
So can people hear all right?
Yeah, I think the mic is necessary.
I know, but like for me personally, I have hard trouble hearing.
Okay, all right.
So I always accept the mic whenever it's offered.
All right, cool.
So we had a couple of questions, and I'm inviting you to put in your own responses online. I'll follow up with you on this. But when we were first coming up with the idea for this, what does diversity look like in your organization, or what does it look like for you? And so I'd like to hear from each of the panelists a little bit about what does it currently look like at your organization, and perhaps what you would like that to look like. And also maybe a note on what diversity, equity, and inclusion mean, because it can mean different things for different people. Because at one of the former panelists, somebody had mentioned, oh yeah, we have Deborah. Deborah's an accountant, so we're diverse. And I was thinking, yes, maybe, but not really. I must continue to work on that.
Oh, sure.
Okay.
So I can't do my answers to everything were gonna be what they said. Trapped. Okay, so I think I won't go into a definition because I'm not an expert at all. This is not what I do for a living. That's equity and inclusion work. I think that's an important thing to make note of, that I check a lot of the diversity boxes, but that is not my professional area of expertise. If anything, I'm a chemist by training. So from my company, we're a relatively small company and was founded by a number of white men. And so there's a lot of work that the company is doing. And I think my role, and I think a lot of the folks at the company, is just kind of holding people accountable, helping people, suggesting that people Google things sometimes, and not kind of taking on that emotional labor, just as, you know, for a woman of color in the company, not being dismissive of them and saying, you know, they're just white men, but instead offering them something that's going to be helpful without, again, taking on too much of a burden for myself. So that's part of it. And I think empowering the people that are very passionate in the company in those areas. We don't have an HR, we don't have, I'm like the acting chief operations officer at, you know, acting, right, at best. So we don't have a lot of formal structures, but that also means we get to kind of decide how things will look and improve things. And one of the ways that has looked in is we'll talk about having a more diverse software engineering pool, because it tends to be young white men tend to be the predominant folks doing that work. And so making a point of hiring, especially women that might not have as much experience, and making a plan to nurture them. And I always tell people, it's not because they're not qualified women of color engineers, it's just that they do not need our job. Like, they can get a job wherever they want, the senior ones, right? And so that's where they go. They don't want to come to a small company working in the middle of nowhere in Connecticut. So we have to kind of be humble about the fact that if we want a diverse engineering pool, especially, we're going to have to mentor people, bring them up, and even to the point of having to ask for exemptions from clients for the type of labor category, and putting in that being willing to do that. So that's just kind of like going that way.
I think one of the big challenges is that so many different companies always think first about diversity and then always forget about what comes after you've done the hiring, you've got people in the door. It turns out that you actually need to keep people too. You can't just hire them. And so I think really reframing those conversations to like also think about like, what does equity look like in the organization? Are you hiring people and then are they just at the lowest levels and they never are eligible for promotions and raises? They're never getting the opportunities to like work on the big projects. They don't feel like they can be heard. Are they leaving every year or so? Right? All of these things that are like, do you just have a revolving door of you just keep hiring all of the people and then you just let them go and scratch your head wondering why did they keep leaving? So I think having the other side of that conversation, how can we do retention better than we're doing, you know, the hiring in the first place? I think those are really important conversations to have.
So I consider myself pretty lucky. My company does a lot around just making it a more diverse environment and more equitable. I think something that I've learned from being at Vanguard is that diversity is a very evolving term. So there's always new ways to be diverse. So I think a lot of times, like at the last panel we were at, it felt like we were talking about diversity in color. But there's also diversity in gender, there's diversity in sexual orientation. We've even learned that there's diversity in the kinds of foods that we bring that some people don't drink. So if we just do all of our events at bars, that we're suddenly excluding, that's not equity anymore, that's actually excluding people. And so I think that one of the things that our company's always trying to do is ask ourselves, is this enough? What more can we be doing? Have we considered every perspective? Are there other things that we should be asking to make sure that we're trying to be as open and inclusive as we can over the long term, to your point? Not, we just brought them in, so us, but you know, how is this a ongoing conversation that we can continue having?
So in my answers, I'm going to focus on the work I do with Out in Tech. So for Out in Tech, we launched last year. March. And one of the major things that we did, we had a panel, and it was the first event, and sorry, I'm a big story person, and I find like stories are great examples. And so for the first event, I spoke with the folks who were working on the launch with me and said that like we have to make sure that the panel we have represents the entire DC community, because this sets the tone for the rest of this, like the rest of our chapter, and the events we do following. And so we made sure to have multiple different intersecting identities represented. And then from there, it's been a very conscious effort anytime we do any type of event, that we're making sure that we are representing as many different experiences as we can. And so, for example, I do have very frank conversations as folks are sharing, like giving me as a panelist, that it's like, hey, actually, we already have like 2 white panelists. We are specifically looking for people of color. We are specifically looking for trans people. Like, we want to make sure that like everyone's voice is being brought. So for me, it's like the listening. We have people come up and give us feedback. That's like, yeah, I didn't see this identity like represented. And it's like, got it. We'll make sure to do that better. Listening to the individuals who are interacting.
I'm Sian, and I work the same place for Lianna. Both work at down in Hamilton. And that is, I personally do a lot of things for diversity and inclusion. So I am on the board of our gay and lesbian resource group, which is called GLOBE. And there I work on our finance, and also I work on LGBTQIA diversity supply program. So we always encourage, if you have a company or business, please register with Lianna and register with your local chamber of commerce to ensure that if you're looking for to be a subcontractor, that you have an opportunity. Once again, if you are an LGBT1 company, please register with down Hamilton and with the Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce so that they can be a part of our business. I'm also a part of our African American network, professional development, and our recruiting and retention. We have a concerted effort at the firm to ensure that African American students, especially at HBCUs, have the opportunity to come and work at booths, and African American people in general know about what we do at the firm, that they can lend their skills to it. I also work in our Women in Data Science effort, which is an effort to really just have women data scientists match the amount of men that work in the same field at the firm. So in those three programs, the firm makes an attempt to increase diversity and inclusion at the firm. Another thing that we really focus on is, Hamilton is an old company. It's a Fortune 500 established. It certainly has this perception of being predominantly white men, predominantly certain type of white men. And I worked a lot with our marketing and communications department to ensure that when there are advertisements about the firm, that it reflects all the different kinds of people that work there. Diversity initiatives are pretty good. Not where we want it to be, obviously. Like most companies are working on having the demographic of the employees in the cities and the country that we're in. But we're making good faith effort in that area.
Thanks so much. I've heard a little bit about the emotional labor related to educating and informing other people in your company, particularly people who are in policy making and situations. And I know for me, this is always a struggle because I'm a web developer, right? I'm a project manager. I have stuff I'm responsible for. Why am I also now responsible for helping diversify and educate other people in the organization? It's almost like a little bit of, I already work, and I'm already being judged on other things, and now we also have to do this. So and then also tying this in with that whole pipeline that Shannon mentioned, if you have somebody, oftentimes at an organization, they might say, okay, we've achieved kind of our goals. We have our kind of token person, but if that person feels uncomfortable, maybe if they join a caucus and then they're maybe punished for speaking up, is that also problematic? Oh, pardon me.
If you have someone downstairs.
Oh,
I'm sorry I'm interrupting you. We have somebody downstairs that's trying to get up here.
I can go there.
Oh, okay, wow. Okay. Did she say she? So yes, my whole idea is what are some strategies that we can do to start to make this more normalized? And frankly, to some extent, for me, I know personally, I think about, is it better to change the existing systems? Is it better to try and work our way through existing mechanisms? Or should we just do our own companies, our own build the world that we want to see? I know Mr. Fuller talked about that. You don't ever change something by changing the existing system. You change it by creating a brand new paradigm. And I feel to some extent that America is grappling with this right now. We have quite a number of initiatives in Me Too, a lot of people speaking up and showing up. I'd like to hear from them what they think about what are some ways that we can move towards a more equitable kind of solution. And that could be personally, or it could be actual organization. I know we all put in that labor, but what can we do to change this on a societal level?
It's a small question. You mean, like, here's the thing, right? The thing is, it's very difficult for folks in the majority to see things like this. So let's say you have a company and you are an earnest diversity and inclusion officer, and you want people of color in film, or you want LGBT folks to come and work at your firm, and you just keep on trying and trying, it's not happening, right? It's very hard for folks to see, the structural barriers that may exist. Like, for instance, you want to have a firm here in Harmon, folks like me, where I live, might not be so easy to physically get to, right? You want to, have a firm that does tech, some kind of web development and such. And it might be, as an LGBT person, and it's true for me, at some point, get thrown out of your house, right? As a person growing up, and it changes the course of your life. That happens to a lot of folks, it happens to me. So there are all kinds of barriers that folks have to overcome just to be quote unquote to working and it just a period of story. I think that a couple of things that can change on a structural side level is it's a good thing that the 9 to 5 working at a desk kind of thing is here. People can work where they are. And that's a good thing for folks in LGBT communities, LGBTQIA communities, because a lot of people just simply can't get to where they need to go. It's also a good thing, at the boot camps and such that are instead of going into academia and going into debt, people can now go to a boot camp, maybe get a scholarship, and launch their careers that way as well. I think at a societal level, it's beyond the scope and within the scope of diversity, inclusion, and equity to change all these structural bases, the structural homophobic systems that we have. I think it's really important for hiring managers and people who are in charge to understand that. When it comes to opening one's own firm, there are a lot of small businesses, especially in this area, that are a lot of folks are registered as women-owned businesses or minority-owned businesses. I'm really, really interested in seeing folks register as LGBT certified businesses as well. And I'm also very, very, very interested in seeing companies have supplier diversity programs that include LGBT. So a lot of supplier diversity programs in general, for big companies, but they only do what the government says, right? The government says minorities and women, but not LGBT. And it's really incumbent on people that work in these firms, people like me or whoever, men, for these firms to insist that supplier diversity programs also include LGBTQIA companies. I have much more to say.
So once again, I'm a storyteller. I will share something actionable that myself and a few volunteers with OSTEM did recently. So a week or two ago, OSTEM had their national conference. One of the feedbacks we've been getting from the conferences is that the career fair component, a lot of the students felt like the sponsors weren't really treating them with respect. They're students in the STEM field, they're expected to have 4.0 GPAs just to get an internship. Some of the things that Sian mentioned in terms of like homelessness or things, there are like all these other factors that just purely by being a person who is part of the LGBTQ community are going to be on top of like this person being in the STEM field. So I spent months planning with the Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion at OSTEM, and we created a 4-hour module session for sponsors. We capped it at 50 participants, but we essentially put together this training that encompassed looking at privilege, race, trans non-binary identities, and barriers to entry in the STEM fields. And we didn't talk at the individuals, we made them work because this is work. We had multiple discussions around each of these things. The barriers, we presented them with case studies that talked about like all of these other aspects of the person's identity that they're bringing into their job, but they still like, presents them with this information as this person still has the ability to do the job, but like, hey, here's a mental health barrier. Hey, this person doesn't identify as like male or female. And we had them discuss like, and anyway, so we did a lot of work. One of the cool things was that the case studies were actually us, the presenters, who had issues getting into like tech and our science, like respective fields. And we're going to turn into something larger. When you talk about emotional labor, it's definitely something that we are grappling with because I like developing, but also my development journey from boot camp to now has been pretty terrible, just to be honest. And the VP for the VP of Diversity and Inclusion for OSTEM has had like a similar experience just being a grad student in the life science field. They have been told that like they can expect this to be like a hazing situation and things like that. And it's like real barriers are being created. So when you're thinking about, I guess like to sort of wrap up, just like thinking about equity, inclusion, things like that, like I guess my advice would be to connect with organizations that are already doing the work. There are people who are fine dedicating their time to like make sure that others don't have to go through the difficulties that they have to. That's one of the reasons I do the amount of volunteer work that I do, and just continue to like grow and educate because it's work, but it's worth it.
I agree with that. I think something that I've noticed in my own life is that I tend to be put into like this party of one. You, Tomás, you're gay. Tell me about the trans experience. I literally,
I'm just drinking my lemonade.
It happens a lot, I think, and I'm sure a lot of you probably experienced this too, where someone's like, oh, this totally different issue that you probably don't know much about. You're LGBTQ, like you should
The voice
of.
of.
Right, and on behalf of all.
All,
So I think that I really agree with what you're saying because I think that one of the things that I've sort of done is I've been like, I can't speak to that. I can't help you with that. But here's like some organizations you can talk to, or these are some places where you can go that are actually actively trying to help you understand this. But it's frustrating to be in that meeting where everyone kind of like just turns and looks at you and you're like, so I'm not Chinese.
So for my part, the short story of why I started Hear Me Code was I was really frustrated going to all these tech events, being one of the only women in the room, and I wanted to do something about that. And I ended up starting my own group because the existing women in tech groups in DC, I wasn't really like, they were fine, but they weren't doing things the specific way that I wanted to. And also, like, as a trans person, I also wondered, like, am I going to be welcome if I go to these? Am I going to be, like, are they going to be okay with me? But you know what, if I start my own, you know what, I'm not gonna be picking myself. And I can also signal to other people who, who might be wondering the same, like, yes, you are welcome here. Yes, you can be part of this. And so that has been really great because there have been a lot of trans people who have joined Hear Me Code and been part of it, and said to me later on, like, I'm so glad that you said right up front that, like, yes, this is a space for me. Yes, this is a place that I can join. So it's been really fascinating also to watch other like similar groups start to adopt similar policies. Like, yes, trans folks are welcome. And I think that also helps to make sure that we're making things more inclusive for everyone.
So I guess my quick story is interviewing for my current role. The CEO started talking to me about diversity initiatives he wanted to put in place. I was like, I see your cultural taxation. And no, we're not going to do that. I was like, I'm not a diversity and inclusion expert. What you're going to do is you're going to hire somebody, you're going to pay somebody money to do this work. He hasn't done it yet, but I'm on him every day. But I think that's part of it. Is I think people need to be reminded, they need to be prodded. And I had to do a similar thing with him about privacy. So he's indiscriminate about his attempts to try to get people to do multiple things. and I took it on myself to tell him no, right? I think sometimes, we say yes to these bosses and then we're mad that they have us do so many things. It's like, well, try saying no. Part of it is that's my personality to be belligerent first. So I'm going to acknowledge that my answer is always no first, and then maybe I'll see if I can do it. So I acknowledge that, but I do think that we need to think about this cultural taxation and inquire about hiring people, paying people for their expertise, and using the analogy of a tax accountant. You don't ask your HR specialist, can you maybe try to figure out this tax code on the side? You don't do that. So don't do it the other direction. And I think some people are just oblivious, and my CEO in particular, he does a lot of stuff, so he thinks everybody else is like him and is willing to roll up their sleeves in areas they have no idea how to do and just try it. So that's part of his ethos, and I'm trying to work with him and help him understand that everybody's not like that, and everybody also is not the CEO. So they just don't have the same, like he talked about not paying himself for 2 years. I was like, you don't pay me for 2 weeks, I'm out. That's a different energy. You come in at this from a different place and a different kind of way of thinking about this company, and you have to think about that. And again, just reminders every time there's an opportunity to send him a link or to just hiring somebody, giving names, etc. So helping, but also not kind of taking this burden on myself, and there's no need to do it.
So another question that I had from the panelists is, and it's interesting because, for example, I did hear from another description that someone was hiring, and it was at our dinner. Somebody was mentioning, a Black woman was mentioning, what is the culture like here during their interview hire? Like, what innocuous question, like, what are you doing to support diversity and inclusion at the company? And then the hirer essentially cut that person out from the process because they had pegged that person as being a troublemaker, like somebody who's going to try and talk to us about that, like, we don't want to, we're already diverse, that whole kind of shutting down behavior. I was just affirmed because somebody in charge is making decisions for an organization. This organization is not going to succeed in the 21st century, right? We already know that if they're not making a conscious effort to become more inclusive, their tech is going to fail, they're not going to get enough input from other people, and they're essentially not going to be as competitive as somebody who has more voices in the room designing the project, including stakeholders. So I wanted to hear if folks had some a recommendation. If you could essentially distill everything into one or more recommendations for your office or for your building, for your workplace, what can you do to make it more of an equitable situation? And I had an answer to this from before. I can share with you. It was very basic things. It's making your mental health, your trans health, your policies visible when you're doing the hiring. It is explaining about what your salary bands are straight up from the get-go, not having it be kind of like this guessing game, saying this is the band that this job is going to be at. It was even things like putting vegan, vegetarian, gluten-free options in the kitchen, not focusing your events around alcohol because they're excluding many people, and just being more thoughtful about the needs of people who are not being elevated. So for example, do you have a prayer room? Do you have a meditation room? Can it be booked? Can it be locked? It can double as the lactation room for people who need that. So just what can we do to be more thoughtful and inclusive about our most kind of vulnerable populations, and to make sure that those people are welcome and included in our decision making.
Good to see you.
Again, I open mic, and then I invite you all to also think about what questions you have, because we'll open this out to the floor.
I think all of those sound awesome, and I think I just gave a recommendation around paying people for their expertise in diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think one, I will blame being a Caribbean person for what I'm about to say. My wife is bracing herself. Is people just need to be honest. Like, if the goal of the company is to make a lot of money and get acquired by some big tech company, then that's your goal. You don't care about how many women and Black people and other people of color and whatever. And that's fine. Don't care. But don't fake it. It's all right. Like, because I will know that you do not care, and I'm not going to move there, and everybody will be happy. So, just be honest and just be truthful about the goal. What's the point? Is the point acquisition or like valuation and all of that type of stuff? I think people get to decide that money is the most important thing to them, and I get to decide to not collaborate. So just be honest. Don't fake the fun.
I think salary transparency goes a long way. Like, can you, not necessarily saying like, oh, you make this amount of money and you make this, and like having like a big spreadsheet of like what everybody makes. But are there some ways that you can, have a sense of like, is it fair? Is it equitable? And if it's not, are there ways to like actually fix it? Like, hey, you know what? Actually, we've been underpaying you by a lot of money. We're gonna fix that, and here is how we're gonna do that. So, are there ways to fix it?
So you covered a lot of the ones that we do. I think one thing that's unique to our company is that and actually probably for a lot of you, is that we do a lot of client work. And so we have to be not only cognizant of the issues that may arise within our own organization, but we also have to be paying attention to some of the stuff that our clients might need or want. And so I'm not really sure what triggered this. It was a massive thing that we had to do. I'm really glad we did it, but we all had to start putting our preferred pronouns in our email signatures. And there's no one in our office that I'm aware of who's trans, but I think that I know we have worked with clients who are. And so it's like one way for us to show that we're, I don't know what the word is, inclusive, without actually having to say, hey, we don't have to call people out for it either, because I also think that can be problematic as well. But yeah, that is something that we think we have to start thinking more about, is like, we can be very inward focused, but we also do a lot of client work. And so we have to make sure that we're also aware of those things that may come up with the work that we're doing with our.
So I actually wanted to comment on the pronouns in the signature, which will also lead me into my recommendation. So by doing that, you also are taking the energy off of like whoever you're working with, whoever you're interviewing, to have to share their pronouns, and like, because you're inviting them to do that by having yours already there. So it plays in a lot of different ways. So it's really awesome that.
Yeah.
And so my recommendation is to just educate yourself if you are trying to be a place that does value diversity and inclusion. Understand why you're doing what you're doing. So this is coming a little bit from, so before I moved over to tech, I worked in HR for 3 years. And that was also a hellish job, but one of the big things was that every time we tried to do things that were diverse and inclusive, it was just a lot of box checking. It wasn't actually understanding the reasons why things were being done the way we do. So like, we we spent a lot of money and sent everyone to like the Undoing Racism workshop. Great workshop if you haven't done it. Highly recommend. It's put on by the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. And the debrief after the workshop was about like logistics. And it was like, how is this run? Was this worth 2 days? And it wasn't actually about any of the content. And like, it was just like, we did this thing. We went as a group to go see Dear White People, and once again it was like, how's the film style? And I was like, what are we doing right now? And, yes, and so there's a lot of talking around, but not actually like being very like honest about it. It was one of the big things and why like going back to that program that like I really had for putting together, but it was like the conversations were not just like, here are some fancy buzzwords, and now you understand diversity and inclusion. It was like, this is what this looks like. Like, are you doing these things? Okay, you're doing them. Do you understand why you're doing them, or are you just doing them just because? So yeah, my biggest thing is just to like educate, like really, really be educated on like what it means to truly be inclusive.
No. It's not a box checking in general. You know, most organizations where I've worked, and where I work now, we're making, again, like I said before, a big effort. But I think the best thing that anyone can do is think about the politics of things. So before I got into tech, I was a political director and lobbyist for a very, very long time. And terrible, worst thing I ever do. Never did. Ever, right? However, I learned a lot of great skills doing that all these years. One of the skills that you learn if you're a lobbyist, right, is to figure out who to talk to about what. And before you even begin a conversation with a lawmaker and such, because you have a billion paths or not. I had to do, I call it a map. Map out who's influential, who's actually powerful, but it's different between the two. Who has the actual power, who's the CEO person, and then who's the person who talks to the CEO, who's influential. That's within the organization. And then you figure out who you need to talk to. If you can't get to the person in charge, you make the person close to the person in charge and talk about what you want to see happen, i.e. more LGBTQIA people hired, or a revamp of the diversity program, or a launch of something like that. So political mapping is incredibly important. I can't tell you, every week, people want to have coffee with me, talk about X, Y, and Z, right? And what they're talking to me about is the same issues. Either they're not getting, paid fairly at their current job, or they're trying to get into like industry and can't figure out a way in, or they're being treated terribly. Right? Those are three things that people are talking about. It's a lot of fun today. And to all people, I say, well, have you taken the time to map out who can actually change your situation besides you, of course, right? And a lot of folks don't do that. So that's like my number one piece of advice. Like map out who can actually change your situation, all the relationships that you can form or keep or cultivate in order for your situation to change. Most people get a job through relationships, right? Not actually through a resume. That's rare. That's my fault. You get them through relationships. Map out who you want in your life to make whatever you need to happen. The second thing is within organizations, I do this because I'm a data person, and if you have extra time, try to do this too. So people are at one level, they go up to another level, they go up to another level, they get to a certain level. And usually at some point in there, suddenly at one level, most people are wiping it, right? Some points, right? That's higher up you go. And it's really important to make another map, which is like a labor map of some sort, right? I do this just because it's just the way my mind works. My organization is this a result of hiring? Is it a result of people leaving? Is it a result of lack of promotions and such, right? And some organizations, that information is a little public, it's public, right? Yeah, if you're coming in, just let them know, right? Because if you ask, I'm not going to get the information. But usually the issues are not with hiring. Right? People are hired. Usually the issues are with promotion, with being passed over, or having a terrible work. So if you see these things, you can actually quantify it. Right? Quantify it, put it down on a piece of paper. People at the very top of the organization are actually interested in that kind of information, not your thoughts and feelings, unfortunately, right? Not how you feel or how you've been mistreated. They should actually write down a piece of paper and show, hey, at this third level hub, folks are leaving because it seems that the women, get promoted after 2.5 years, the men are promoted after 1 year, right? That's a problem. We need to fix that. And people at the higher levels of the organizations are very, very, very willing to listen. Because there are a couple of things that people that run organizations listen to check on. Listen to stats, right? And listen to cash, right? They just love data. They just love data. This is why I became a data scientist. But they love data. So any data that you can have that will make your life personally easier, right? And benefit people in the organization are showing up in the All right, the third thing is this. So we talk about emotional labor. If you're a woman, if you're a person of color, if you're both, and if you're LGBT, certainly in all cases, you're just gonna have to do emotional labor. It's just, there's no avoiding it. If I had a nickel, I could say to myself, I'm not doing this, man. You all should know better. If I had a nickel, I would be Jeff Bezos right now. I wouldn't even be here, right? If I were here, I'd come in on my own help. Seriously, I would be very, 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 very rich. But saying that to myself doesn't get me to where I need to be. There is going to be emotional labor, and me sensing that labor doesn't help, right? For me, didn't help. I decided to do was to lean into it. And lean into it through the two ways that count in the way that I see. Lean into the political mapping to get to know the people that I need to know to make a difference. And then lean into, here's the data of our organization, right? This is what's actually happening here. So that if ever I feel mistreated or passed over or what have you, right? I have the ammunition to either leave the mind and hell up or to the organization, knowing that I literally made people. Last year at Newman, we did something wild. I mean, absolutely crazy. I've been there for a year and a half. We do a lot of crazy things. Not crazy things. One of the things we did was a hackathon for hiring. Within our own firm, we did an internal hackathon to look at retention and hiring of women technologists in the firm. Crazy. It was absolutely insane. Everybody will go, oh, you can't do that. My paper company book. I was like, okay, I'm just saying, just letting you know though that here's what's happening. These are the actual numbers. And if we are committed to diversity, one way to do that is to have a company-wide exercise, to predict when women will leave and why they'll leave, and then to come up with some solutions for that. That's all. And then most people were like, Sian, you're nuts. They're never going to go for it. Of course we did it. Of course we did. Because at the end of the day, right, companies are interested in, right, two things, right, data, right, and making money. As you mentioned, right, the more diverse an organization, the more money it makes. McKinsey's doing this over and over again. The more diverse your firm is, the more likely you are to make money, not just more, 35%. So we did it. We came up with solutions. Getting more women in the door. We're going to do it again with a couple of other groups of the firm that are now on other resource groups. And just those are some things that you can think
Thanks so much. So I had asked the participants to prepare for some of these questions, but I do want us to be a little bit in the hot seat. So I'm inviting you to think a little bit about what you might want to have a question about. I guess I'm here. So I'll go.
My experience at my prior organization was very much, it was actually a rather diverse organization, and it had accomplished a lot of things through a lot of people that were not necessarily the original leadership of the organization to have a diverse environment. At the same time, precisely what we know happens now, right? At a certain level, everybody was white, everybody was largely male. My department in particular was actually a largely female department, and even there, it was skewed male in the leadership. Now, when it came to figuring out how to find barriers for opportunity for growth, for leadership, for people of color in the department, the problem was much more nuanced. It was very difficult to figure out how to train managers and hiring managers in general to recognize their own bias, identify their own challenges, and actually make the decision that might make them uncomfortable. And so one of the things that I find a challenge in all this, and something I'd love to be able to work on, because it's something that affects me after leaving the company, and it's still something that I think is extraordinarily important, is that it's not just about naming the issue, and I believe 100% of kind of the data and caching, and also the fact that you guys did that hackathon is extraordinary. But what other strategies do you know of that organizations are putting into place that are focused on not simply saying, hey, let's bring in more people, but let's actually make sure that we understand the cultural differences or the background differences that lead people not to be selected when they actually are deserving of promotion.
So in that training that we did for sponsors, we actually talked a little bit about unconscious bias and implicit bias. And one of the biggest things I think organizations can do when training managers is to explain to them that their uncomfortability is a good thing, and that it's usually crowded in growth. If you don't jazz with someone right away, like that is a great moment to ask yourself why, and does that mean that this person is going to bring something else to the organization that we don't have, right? Because if everyone is just like agreeing with you and like, yes, this person has the same background, yes, this person makes me feel comfortable, oh my gosh, they remind me of myself, then it's like, okay, you just hired another version of yourself. And like, or even so, like if someone is doing the job exactly the way that you do it, okay, great, so now you're promoting another version of yourself. And instead to like look at the things that make, look at the differences that folks are bringing to the table, and even if you don't understand them, realize that by having that person at the table, like, and by having them in a higher position, they'll help you with the understanding because they're bringing it in.
Does anybody else? So I also, there's a couple of things you can implement or ask to implement here. The same people use the same questions for all candidates. And also making sure to have at least one kind of diversity candidate. I know the NFL does this, and they have a rule for it, and they've been able to increase the number of coaches by 45% just by having 3 people hire, 3 people are asking all the same questions, and then asking it from all the candidates, making sure at least one candidate is a minority. Do other people have other questions? I mean, we're here, let's talk.
I just have a comment about maybe some feedback about that strategy, or I guess some questions about that strategy. Because I think I appreciate that the panel has been talking about issues of emotional labor and cultural taxation and all that kind of stuff. And I think, especially when we think about lots of people of color here, less, it's white folks, if you're hiring leaders and you're expecting you're hiring people to reflect some diversity, the fewer folks you have up here means the more burden on them to try to do all of that work. And it's, I think sometimes when we think about what's your one strategy or what's your two strategies, an essential place to start, right? Because you have to sort of start with what's the one place I could chip away or whatever. But I think if we do that at the exclusion of thinking about an entire system that needs to change to accommodate and welcome and nurture, I think sometimes we're just sort of putting Band-Aids on things that end up then also hurting folks. Because if you're the one woman of color in the senior leadership team and then you have to sit on every single hiring panel, I mean, when are you going to do your own work? I would imagine that that leads to a feeling of being among a lot of others, of being tokenized and all sorts of stuff. So I think it's not that I think that's not important. I mean, you certainly don't want your hiring to be made up of white dudes, exclusively. But it's just, I think, something to be thoughtful about.
And I think because I live with this one, I certainly absorb some of this because our company right now is hiring a bunch of VPs. I disagree with them hiring a bunch of VPs, A. And B, I'm the most senior woman of color. I think I'm one of the few women of color in the company at all. And I just didn't volunteer. I'm like, no, I'm not doing it. And what that forced the CEO to do is have a more junior woman of color be on the panel. So instead of it being that you have to outrank the people you're hiring, because that's like an arbitrary rule. I think that's a federal thing that they did, right? GS level, you have to be the GS level or higher. Why? When you're talking about mid to senior level people, there's a lot of aspects of evaluation that are mid for a senior person, especially when you talk about emotional intelligence and other parts of the skill set. And so again, I think this is part of us absolutely doing work when we want to, can do, but also sometimes you have to take a step back because if I had volunteered to do this panel, would other women of color in the company have a chance to? Probably not, right? Just because of expertise, areas, blah, blah, blah. I would have taken that spot away from a more junior person, and I think that's part of it too, is giving people a chance to shine. And I didn't have to do it, but I would have talked to the CEO about letting somebody more junior potentially volunteer. So I think that's a really important piece as well, for sure. Thank you, Ms. Ross.
So I would say, I'd be interested to see how people react to this, but it's something our company is doing a total systemic change to the way that we operate. So we're redoing our organizational structure. We already do pay transparency, but now we're doing salary bands, and we created this matrix of 132 skills that help dictate what level you should be at. And then we started implementing 360 reviews as well. So it's not just you and your supervisor, it's you review your supervisor and that person's supervisor. And this episode's like the thing is, and this is my first time going into a system like this, but I wonder if in being so objective that you inadvertently override some of those things that are a little bit more nuanced that could be impacting. I don't know if anyone has thoughts on that. I mean, I think this is my company's way of because we have, since most of my company is women, there's a lot more issues around pay equality, and it gets perpetuated. Like if your first company underpays you, and then your next company asks what you're starting, what you're based, and then it just keeps going. So this is one way that our company is trying to adjust that specifically. But I'd be interested to hear what other folks think as far as that kind of a systemic change to the way an organization runs. Well, so that we created the skills matrix is basically going to dictate our skills matrix will say, if you have 57 skills, your title should be this, and this is what you're getting paid. There's no negotiating, that's just, it is. We can, like, the skills we can pick and choose, although some skills are based on, if you're a manager, you need to be able to do these 3 things. But I think, I don't know if becoming a cog in a machine is the best way to make everything fair for everyone, but I also think it's one way that our company is like trying to say, okay, we can't have account managers for making 85 and also 65. Like, that's not equitable.
Right. So making the pay rate transparent so everybody sees that everybody's getting paid.
Right. Well, and we already do that, but it's,
Right.
we see it, now it's like, we have to correct it.
Yes.
Even that, right? Like, to your, what you were saying, like, I think some of our employees are gonna be told, so, we were underpaying you a little bit, and so now we're gonna adjust your salary to match that.
So just to go back to the 360 review, I actually came from an organization that did a lot of 360 reviews, and that actually didn't make the problem better. I actually found that problem a lot worse. Because what ended up happening is they're starting to form, I guess, like different groups. So people would give other people good reviews, and then they'll ban against other people, and they'll give them bad reviews. So it actually impacted.
Survivor.
Yeah, it's like survival. Yeah, exactly. It's the same thing. It's like, so you see people that are getting promotions and then don't do anything because they're working in the systems, they're gaming the system to get more money.
And once again, that is a fine example of political mapping.
Yeah.
I was just gonna ask.
But what you just described is a great example of political mapping, right? That is, people will figure out how to use relationships to get ahead despite having this apparently transparent process. Case in point.
For the audience, I thought the audience was talking. I might have misheard.
I would just also ask who's defining the skills, who's training people how to recognize them, who is deciding what actionable qualities evidence that, because I think that's sort of a.
It's been a year and a half. Every single person had to fill out a survey of all the skills that they believed they had, and then our COO and HR director compared all of the skills that people said and looked at trends to see which ones, based on what job category they were in, people had in common, and then which were the most common, and then they compared it to the kind of skills you need to be able to do.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Did an external company come in and help you guys do this? Was this you commissioned a consulting group of some kind to come do this, or you'll do this all internally?
That's a good question. I've only been there for 6
There's a
months.
company making money off of this.
Doing this.
And that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
As a person who comes from a consulting company, that's what we do. We sell people things. From my perspective, I think this is, again, the intention. And like there's a lot of other additional things people have to think about, but I think that my prediction for you is that people will hit it over time, and the leadership will say, okay, let's try something different. But they have to see it play out a little bit, because they see this problem, and this probably consulting company has brought this to them as a solution that has worked with other companies, and they're like, okay, we have to do something, so let's try this, and let's push through all the painful parts of this and try to make this work for our company to improve ourselves. But over things like that kind of, again, it not only fall apart, but it's like the things like consolidation, like people consolidate the IT, then they put it out again, do it again, like it's just cyclical. I hope that doesn't sound too cynical from my part, but it's just, I think that's just some of the stuff companies have to go through, is trying these big experiments at the specific level.
Yeah, I mean, like I think the intention is definitely in the right place. I think my concern is that we are a small company, so, and there are nuances to why certain people will and will not apply for a promotion, don't develop certain skills, and so I guess the only thing that I worry about is if we make it such an objective system that then we lose the things that might actually be helping us understand why a certain employee hasn't built any new skills, and maybe it's because they're intimidated by the person who has that skills, or maybe they don't, like it's just, so we'll see. It's it's an interesting way to try to approach it so that we're not having issues of,
Well, there's also still a lot that goes into, the rating systems itself, right? Like, even like a 0 to 5 is still a subjective rating, right? Like you can put a number to it, it's quantitative, but it's still subjective. Also, subject to unconscious bias, also subject to all kinds of things. Like when you're evaluating yourself, how highly do you rate yourself? And like there are studies that show, that there are all kinds of reasons why, some people or other people will rate themselves lower, even when they have those skills at a high level. And so when you have that and people are rating themselves lower, and then you add in unconscious bias, and then people are rating other people lower, then maybe they should are higher, whatever the case might be. Like you still got a number, but I wouldn't call it objective.
Again, in the title of this is about holding space for these issues, for LGBTQIA issues in technology. I wonder if basing everything on this matrix, like what about just who somebody is? I know at my work, they had talked about engineering values and in the charter and putting into the language that we value diversity. And one of the reasons was because of the bottom line, because it helps us create a certain product. And then another of my colleagues was saying, well, we also value diversity. Somebody doesn't have to contribute to the bottom line. That's not necessarily why we want this person to be in our building, just to make money for the company. So I often wonder, how can we, again, start to navigate this and start to build a more inclusive technology system. So any final thoughts from some of our panelists? I know we have a chance to discuss, and I'll be putting this onto the recording. Here's your chance.
Conversation.
Any thoughts from the audience? We're good? We solved it?
Well done.
Well, thanks everybody for participating in this. I really do appreciate it. And I'll be following up with where we can find recording, as well as where you can answer some of the questions for yourself and see what other participants in the region have said. Thank you again for spending the afternoon with us, and we'll be able to talk with the panelists and with the audience directly. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you all for sharing.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here.
Right. Yeah.